I'm going to stay very far away from my laptop, I guess. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Darcy Clarke. Can I quickly ask you to do something I ask, especially because it's been a long day? For the folks that can stand, please stand for a second, if you can. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands up, all the way up. And we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to hold it. Okay, I know you can see my belly button. Okay, wait, and then we're gonna go out, and now you can sit down. So that's quickly to get some oxygen into your brain. It's been a long day. You're gonna listen to me the next 40 minutes, hopefully, not fall asleep. And listen to package management. When I was asked to speak here, I was like, what the heck am I gonna talk about? Well, what have I been working on for the last 4 years? It's package management. Who here has ever written JavaScript? Sounds like a lot of you have. Sick. Like, this is the crew. This is my people. Cool. So, feel free to grab the QR code. Slides are up, and you can follow along. My name is Darcy Clarke. I founded a company called Themify. Any WordPress folks here? Yeah, back in the day, oh my gosh, JavaScript, cool, WordPress, nah. And I also have done a lot of work in the open source. I work very closely with the Node project, OpenJS Foundation. And for the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years, I was leading the NPM CLI team, as Ahmed said. So huge impact. I'm hiding in your dev dependencies, is what I like to say. Like somewhere in your system, like my name is there. If you've run npm install in the last month, like how many people? Or these, okay. Sorry? Yeah, uninstall, npm uninstall. You can install me. I am a package on the registry. Go ahead, at Darcy. I'm based here in Toronto, so if you folks are here, feel free to hang out. Like I'm in Etobicoke, so not really Toronto. So I did contracting on and off for about a decade, so that's why there's a bunch of cool agencies that I worked with. And like Ahmed said, is that right? I've built some award-winning experiences for folks. I also just recently founded a company called Volt. So if you see some cool stickers, holographic stickers at the back, please take one. You can go check it out. vlt.sh is the URL. It's still sort of in stealth mode. And today, the agenda is going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about the current state of our tooling and the issues with it. There's future state tooling and the opportunities that we have within the package management space. And then plus, we're going to talk about a little scary few things. And in the words of Brian LaRue, I do know where the bodies are buried in NPM and GitHub, so just watch out. Quick poll for folks. Who cares how fast their code runs? Raise your hands. Okay, so some of you don't care. Cool. Who cares how readable their code is? Okay, a bit more. Nice, okay. Who cares how their code is licensed? Some really don't care. Okay, cool. Who cares how secure their code is? Yeah. Where's Frost? Is he in it? There he is. Okay. Who cares how much time they have to write code? Wow, okay. Who cares about how much they get paid for their code and their work? Wow, not everybody. Well, okay, cool. I want to get those names for later. Who cares how accurate their code is? Okay, so that very last one is the one that I care very deeply about, and you're going to find out why very quickly here. I want to pull up this quote. It's by Steve Jobs. I'm not sure if you've seen it before. It's from back in 1997, one of the first WWDCs. This is something I believe very strongly with. And I'll just read it verbatim. The way you get programming productivity is not by increasing the lines of code per programmer per day. That doesn't work. The way you get programmer productivity is by eliminating lines of code you have to write. And I think this has to deal with dependencies. So a lot of the talks this morning were about AI, and I was concerned I'm going to be the only non-AI talk here. Like, people are going to be like, he's so boring. He's talking about like big data. That's like 5 years ago, man. So, but But truly, this last part of the quote is the key here. The line of code that's the fastest to write and never breaks, that doesn't need maintenance, is the line you never had to write. And so if you are using a package registry today, you're using packages, you're using dependencies, you're living the dream, right? Free software for free. You're not maintaining it, probably, unless your how many people have patched a dependency in the last year? Oh, okay, we got a few. And these are all the nerds. So what's going on actually in the JavaScript ecosystem, especially when we talk about package management? Well, NPM is huge. If you didn't know the stats, it was about 3.2 million packages in the registry. There was a huge spam attack, and they actually removed about 800,000 packages in the last month or two. So there's roughly 2.5 million packages in the registry. And every month, there's over 200 billion installations, right? So, I mean, how many of those is Rich Gilbank who's looking at his phone? It's probably at least half that, right, Rich? And most of these dependencies that we are installing are actually these things called transitive dependencies. So they aren't the direct dependency. They aren't the thing that we are like, hey, I need React. It's actually the thing that React depends on. Most of the dependencies you're installing are actually these things that are coming along for the ride because they were installed because of one of your direct dependencies. So here's a quick graph. If you haven't heard this term before, I have a package A, depends on package B, and B depends on C. C is what we would consider a transitive dependency to A. And actually, most projects in the JavaScript ecosystem are comprised of mostly transitive dependencies. So the average project, this was from the GitHub State of the Octoverse, GitHub State of the Octoverse back in 2020, 683 transitive dependencies on average in projects, which is kind of crazy. Compare that to how many direct dependencies were in those projects, which, as you can see, is 10. And across the other languages, it's not even close. Like JavaScript has this like crazy, insane consumption of transitive dependencies. So you got this small project, and you're like, come on, bring all your friends, let's go, get in here. And of course, you've seen these. You've seen these. Like the one I hate is definitely the black hole one. I've seen this a million times. Oh, it kills me. But you might be thinking to yourself, we can solve this problem. All we have to do is worry about just the direct dependencies, right? I don't care about those transitive dependencies. I didn't actually care if they got installed or not. Well, unfortunately, roughly 75% of the vulnerabilities that happen in the supply chain today are in those transitive dependencies, right? So you really should care about that deeply nested web of trust that you're installing with your dependency graph. And of course, supply chain attacks in general are actually growing in nature. So year over year, they're growing by 742%. What that looks like on a graph is kind of scary, right? And so this was part of Sonatype's State of the Software Supply Chain Security report, which was done in 2022. So this is kind of scary. We're seeing more and more bad actors try to take advantage of this crazy consumption story that lives within JavaScript. So whose problem is this? You're not going to like this. Well, 90% of companies are actually using open source, right? All your companies are using open source. This stat I feel like is completely bogus. 100% of companies are using open source. This is ridiculous. And that's totally different than like 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, when we were totally closed source. We were totally writing big contracts to consume white label solutions. Now everything's out in the open. We're consuming more open source than we ever have. And yet, management teams, your teams, maybe even you, are not really accounting for what we call the total cost of ownership, right? And that usually includes these sort of calculations of what was the purchase price of the software versus long-term maintenance. And this equation doesn't even account for the fact that we're basically getting this stuff for free. And developers are like, I wrote it in the license. Like, this is on you if if you're starting to consume one of my packages, it's a lemon, like, you got to fix it, right? It's not my problem. And I've heard from many maintainers. I've had hundreds of hours sitting with maintainers, talking with maintainers. They're streamed online on YouTube if you want to go check them out. And a lot of them are upset with the term supply, right? Supply chain, and them as suppliers. They aren't supplying software to you, right? You are consuming something as is, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, you better patch it. Of course, so this equation is totally wrong. You got something for free, and now you have 100% of the maintenance burden and the cost, and you need to figure out what that looks like long term. What does it mean to support essentially all this free software? And there's actually data around this. You folks, engineers out here, have been surveyed. I don't know if this is true for your teams, but up to 50% of engineering time is getting wasted on managing supply chains and managing your dependency graph. How many folks feel this is true? Like, you're spending, let's say, 25 to 50%. I saw a few hands, right? And it really comes down to these 4 bullets, like why this is wasting time. It's reviewing and updating dependencies. You need expertise to do this. You need your leads. Maybe you need somebody that's, your JavaScript expert. There's a ton of noise and errors, and you can't even sift through them all, right? And then organizations, unfortunately, are just, instead of even dealing with this, they're shipping unsecure software. And of course, in terms of the sustainability story, software maintainers can't pay their bills, which is kind of crazy, especially the ones that are successful, quote unquote. So what's the role of package manager in this ecosystem? Because it's looking kind of bleak, right? Well, it's the Swiss Army knife, right? It does everything. It allows you to search and discover packages to consume, authenticate, do permissioning, building, testing, everything. A package manager truly has all the tools for you. And when you look at it in the larger ecosystem of tooling, I'm not sure if folks use anything on here, but you probably use some tool on this. You can see that as you get down into sort of the tool chain, there's less and less players. True package managers sort of play in this space. Bun is relatively new. How many people have played with that? 1, 2. And so this is really interesting because there's not a lot of people innovating in the package management space. There's more folks in the build pipeline, CI/CD, CD, security, et cetera. But really, there's only a few players. And of course, this is where we're focusing on when I talk about the package management ecosystem. These are sort of the categories of tooling that you'll see us dig into. So NPM is the largest, right? Most of you said that you've used NPM in the last couple months, maybe. It was the package manager I helped to maintain over the last 3.5 years. My team actually maintained a whole bunch of dependencies, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, so I left in December, but we did a lot of great work. We clawed back 10% of the market share from Yarn. Any Yarn users still? Hey, Yarn user! No. There we go. That's a Yarn developer right there. But yeah, NPM is the biggest Swiss Army knife out there, which is kind of cool. And so I want to dig into sort of the current state of some of NPM's features, capabilities, but also more broadly, capabilities that I see in package managers that are coming up day in, day out. So I'm not sure if you had this experience in terms of trying to find a package, right? Has anybody even looked for a net new package recently? Yeah. You go onto NPM's website, and you're like, what is these little bars on the right-hand side? What does that mean? There's like a letter, PQM. Oh, it must be like the popularity, quality, maintenance, but what do those mean? It's pretty terse experience, and nobody really knows what the whole sorting and algorithm behind it is about. It was basically forked from a open source MPS project, which is kind of crazy. And of course, you end up just going to Google, which is unfortunate, and this is usually how you discover packages. It's just a terrible experience today. In terms of the state of authentication, it gets even worse, right? So when you go to log into NPM, if you've done this recently, you generate an auth token. I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but you generate an auth token, which basically becomes like a session token. But you can see I've underlined two key things here. It's a publish token, and it never expires. So that's interesting. How could that go wrong, right? So if you log out, right, if you log out of NPM, it's going to actually destroy the token. Great, right? Thumbs up. NPM's doing the right thing. Our package manager, it's got some good capabilities in it. But let's just say you log in, right? And then you forget to log out, and you log in again. And now you've got two tokens just hanging out, and potentially hanging out in your environment, hanging out in your CI, CD. And I would guess right now, many of you have a whole bunch of tokens living right now in the ether that haven't been expired, that are active today, and they're actually because you logged in to NPM maybe one too many times without destroying that token. So if you happen to see tokens that aren't named, you haven't generated themselves, or you haven't generated them yourselves, please go delete those. They are likely roaming session tokens, quote unquote session tokens. Please go delete them all. There's probably many of them. It is very concerning that this is not cleaned up. It's very concerning that these aren't expiring. Are you raising your hand? You're just very tired, I get it. You're like, oh no, an NPM talk. So the current state of installation, this is going to be the fun one that I know everybody's going to be super excited about. If you've heard about no, zero, or auto install before, the concept, it's basically the new serverless. And I would just want to be the first one to say this, unless somebody else has. Brian, can you correct me? Has somebody else said this before? Ah, nice. Okay, cool. So, there was a few projects before Yarn. I think Tink was maybe the first one to popularize this idea of a no install. But it's essentially the idea that they're going to go fetch Deno or Bun are going to go fetch your packages at runtime. And so I just wanted to put it out there that basically there's still an install, just like serverless. There's still a server somewhere. They're just making it hard for you to find those dependencies that might have malware, which is just insane. So I wanted to show you a quick example of an installation process across package managers. So if anybody's created React app, this is sort of a legacy project, but I decided to use it anyways. So I ran npm or npx create React app, and I got 7 direct dependencies, right? So this looks good. This is totally fine. That's a totally normal number of dependencies. Okay, are you ready? Okay, this is a trap. And now you install with Yarn or PNPM or NPM or Bun and Deno, and you get all these different numbers of dependencies. Are you scared yet? Right? And I didn't add any configuration. I didn't change anything to the installation process. I just ran these package managers as is. And there was a difference of over 850 dependencies between the top and lowest number of dependencies in these package managers. So if you can imagine your teams or you trying to navigate basically this variant of dependency reification is what we call it. It can be very tough, and this is scary for security tools. It's scary for people that need to figure out what's going on. So you're like, wait, Darcy, what the heck is actually happening? Well, I can tell you a couple things. Package managers all independently make choices, right? They make choices about how they're going to treat development dependencies, optional dependencies, peer dependencies, overrides, and resolutions. They all have features and capabilities which change your dependency graph. And this is big. You can't just have interop between one package manager and another. You might be installing a net new package you didn't expect to, which is kind of crazy. And so this can be a bit overwhelming, unfortunately. And there's this other problem within the installation process where there's actually non-determinism in the install. So if you find things like distribution tags in package references, you should try to get rid of them. right? So that at latest is an example of a distribution tag. That's essentially a mutable reference. That changes over time. Essentially, a new version can be published to that distribution tag, and you have this slippery reference to a dependency. And same with Git repositories and remote tarball URLs. If you see these, please remove them or try to remove them for yourselves. Also, obviously, if you're not using lock files at this point in time, I apologize. The message didn't get to you in the last 6, 7 years. Please use lock files. Obviously, this will help you a bit. And I just glad reminded me I had a time travel slide, so I had to put it in here. There's actually a flag called before in the npm CLI if you're using it, and you can actually lock yourself into registry-specific timestamps for versions, so you can basically create like a ceiling for the time in which dependencies were published to the registry, and do some time traveling and essentially go back in time and say, only give me dependencies that were published before this date. So now you're like, okay, life is like an npm install. You never know what you're going to get, which is unfortunate, and you're getting scared because you thought you were talking about developer experience, and now you're like, I think this is a security talk wrapped in developer experience, and it truly is. We're going to talk about security a bit. I apologize, but developer experience, it's all about creating good software. So who's run npm audit before? Awesome. Or you've had it run for you, right? We did that. That was really nice of us, right? To run audits, to tell you that there's problems during, post-installation. Say, hey, there's 6 high vulnerabilities here. You should go fix them. And you say, hey, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go run npm audit fix. And you're like, sweet. This is going to work out well. And I bet you someone here knows what's about to happen. And whoa! So I had 6 vulnerabilities, and now I've got 84. Okay, well, this is a problem, right? The tooling itself is working against us. The tooling itself, the developer tools that we're using are working against us. And guess what? To add insult to injury, it tells you to run npm audit fix again. You're like, no way. Fool me once, right? Fool me once. That number is doubling, for sure. So this is a huge problem, npm, one of the most, I ran this. I managed this tool, by the way. I didn't make this. I inherited this. But there's many, many scenarios like this that unfortunately you run into, your teams run into, and I hope that maybe you'll give yourself some grace, even just listening to me laugh at it, right? Because there's a bunch of other people here that worked at npm, not just me, in this room, maybe some with higher titles. Just gonna say. So, yeah, you're like, of course, what do I do now? I don't even know how to run these tools without getting problems. Oh my gosh, and it's totally valid. You can be afraid to even say, I've got issues, I don't even know where to start to resolve them. And unfortunately, it gets worse. It is very likely in the next year, the data shows that you are going to get an advisory to your front doorstep that says, hey, you've got a vulnerable package in your dependency graph in the next year. And if you look at GitHub's own advisory database, which is growing day over day, it's got over 3,000 advisories specific to npm. It's got 8,000 malware advisories, again, growing. 80%. Okay, 80% of all the events that Dependabot sends on the platform are for JavaScript. GitHub is the home for JavaScript, not open source. It's JavaScript. Truly, I don't kid. So what can you do? Well, there's some features in the actual package managers themselves that can help you sort of give you an escape hatch. Yarn had something called resolutions, if you have ever heard of it. npm implemented something called overrides. This gives you a way to patch or essentially swap a package if you know and are able to switch it out and want to do some more advanced sort of swapping of dependencies in your graph. And there's benefits here. Obviously, you can resolve conflicts, like you can resolve some of those CVE issues. You can fork and patch dependencies, and I spelled dependencies wrong. And like maybe the one, like I probably spelled it 1,000 times in this slide deck. And you can block known bad versions or malware. There's also, brand new installation strategies. So PNPM, if you've heard of it, performant NPM, great marketing, cool Zoltan. Introduced a net new way to essentially reify node packages into node modules into sort of a global store, which actually helps with isolation of dependencies and also has some performance benefits to it because you're essentially symlinking to things. NPM's install now actually has this strategy, just like Yarn, just like Bun, can all essentially use this strategy now for installations. And again, the benefits are more performance, deduplication of redundant nested dependencies, and safer module resolution, which is really cool. So some cool features and capabilities there. Of course, how many people are using monorepos or workspaces? A few. You might be using some advanced tools or some legacy tools like Lerna or an NX or Turbo Repo. NPM finally shipped workspaces back in NPM 7. We finally got around to it. And there's a whole bunch of new capabilities around that as well. But pretty much all of the package managers now support workspaces and monorepos. It's a great way to, again, sort of orchestrate packages with the same dependencies to do reporting, managing of issues, coordination of releases, a whole bunch of stuff. So this is where we, again, go down a rabbit hole a bit. The current state of CI and CD solutions for package management. You might know these two people. Does anybody use either of these tools? Yeah? Anybody use Dependabot? Anybody see Dependabot? Yeah. Oh, here it comes, uses, yeah. So So you're like, okay, I've got 300 open issues from Dependabot, open PRs actually. This is an example of, this was my team's example. I had a team of 4, and we had 300 open pull requests. Like, how are we going to deal with that? Well, guess what? We had already dealt with 3,000. So 300 is looking pretty good, right? Like, we had already dealt with that. So there's a ton of spam with these tools, right? How do you keep up with these? And it's kind of insane. In fact, pull requests often, wait, and I'll let you laugh at the guy throwing the packages. Pull requests take on average 4 days to even get picked up by developers, right? So these aren't even getting reviewed. And when you finally review one of these, what a lot of people are doing is they're saying, hey, I trust the tool, I'm going to close my eyes, hit merge, and boom, you've got a vulnerability, you've potentially just added something because you don't care anymore. It's just the noise is inundating our teams. And these are some of the threats, not just a poop in a package, but the vulnerabilities, the malware, the typo squatting, dependency confusion. There's a ton of threats with us, and taking the strategy of closing our eyes and sort of shutting things out and just like consuming packages without actually looking at what they are is very, very dangerous. Has anybody seen my blog post about manifest confusion? Not yet, but you're going to. Has anybody listened to JS Party? Because you're all JavaScript nerds. Yeah? Skip the first 3 minutes of the next episode. My audio is terrible. I promise you. We talk about this issue. And so everybody just take a deep breath because it's about to get spicy. So people have asked me, is NPM just broken by design? And it's true, it actually is. It is. It is. I found a massive issue with the way that we handle tarballs and the way we handle metadata about packages. And so the blog post I'm talking about, it's on our website, blog.vlt.sh. It's the only blog post there, so it's going to be hard to miss. And it got picked up the last couple weeks. Again, like I said, the latest JS Party. You want to go hang out, listen to it in your spare time. I hope you do. But essentially, I'll give you a quick highlight of what actually is happening here. Package publishing today, and actually for the last decade and a bit, has done something really dumb. You basically pass the NPM registry, the server, both a receipt or a manifest of the contents of your package as well as your package, independently. That's why there's two arrows going from 1 to 2. Now, you can see that 1 going to 2 shares like 2 different colors here. I tried to represent this as best as possible to basically show actually the receipt is different than what's in the package. And what has been happening is clients say, oh, I trust that the manifest, the receipt, actually tells me exactly what's in it. And the NPM server has not been validating that these two things are the same. So I liken it like going to a self-checkout, right? And I get to give the little machine a receipt that says, I'm buying an apple. But really, what's in the package is a brand new car, right? I was like, Bob, open up the package. So these two things don't match, right? Except I'm the one that gets to determine what goes into them. So this is a huge issue. What should the registry be doing? And it's not. It should be essentially validating and erroring out when you try to publish with inconsistency. And this has been happening for over a decade. And so there's benign actual use cases and actual benign metadata that has been incorrectly added into the registry. And so there's a couple options. Like I said, the first could be, hey, we still take those 2 pieces of data today, and we decide to validate them. We throw an error if they don't connect. Or we say, stop giving us a receipt. That's our job, right? I'm the cashier. I'm going to tell you whether or not the package you're giving me has what you say it has in it. And I will give out the receipt, right? So if it has bad things, the clients can know that it's got bad things. And when it has good things in the ideal situation, everything looks good. And so this is what manifest confusion is at its core. I hope that you take this knowledge away. You don't have to listen to me for the extra 3 minutes. And unfortunately, if you use any of these tools, you might be susceptible to this today, right? I reported this 2 weeks ago. I have been getting some interesting emails from folks at big companies that think that pretty much all their security products are susceptible to this, and they are. So at your companies, go back, read that blog post, look into it, and try to be mindful of essentially what you're consuming from the NPM registry. There is hope, I swear. I swear there's hope. And he's sitting in this room. It's for us. And socket.dev, they were on top of this from the get-go, which is pretty amazing. If you haven't checked out their product, he's going to be talking about it, I think, tomorrow. They actually now have an alert. They were one of the only security companies out there right now that are properly checking for this issue. And now, if you use my test package and you go check it out on their website, it will actually flag this kind of vulnerability for you. So this is amazing tooling. The security insights that the team over there are finding are amazing. Check it out. Please use it and protect yourselves. So what are the future state of tools in package management? Well, a key here is that our ecosystem, our industry likes to make things work. Ideally, they like to make things work properly, and then we'll make them very fast. But some folks have not been doing that. They have decided to just make things fast and then work backwards, which is totally fine. That's okay. Some people are going fast and breaking things. But I like to take the strategy of make things right, especially after 3.5 years of working with something that works, like NPM. Now I think it's time to actually correct all the mistakes that you saw. So one of the keys that I care about really quite a lot in what I want to see in future tooling and what I'm building into future tools is something called reproducible installations. So that mutable problem we were talking about before, getting rid of non-determinism in the installation process is key. And so a huge part of that is finding ways to deal with why install scripts exist today for packages, why people use them, why they need to be built, why people distribute half-baked packages. And so the concept of package distributions is very similar to overrides, in which we are swapping a package for something else based on your operating system or other kind of conditionals in the environment. So there's actually an RFC drafted by myself in the npm RFCs repo. You can go check it out. This is a future capability that ideally would push install scripts into a place where we could eventually turn them off by default, which is amazing, right, from a security standpoint. Then standards and introspection. So standards in the package management space are, there's zero. There's nothing. And it kind of reminds me of before HTML5 came around, and then there was standards there. Anybody remember that time, that dark period? Yeah, I remember that time. And all the browsers, all the clients interpreted your HTML markup differently, right? Is that not just insane? Is not what I just showed you with the package managers just not okay? Go yell to your local package manager author, and it's not me. So we need standardization. We need standardization in terms of the resolution of your dependency graph. We need standardization in terms of the querying of that dependency graph. And so there are a couple efforts in this space. The Winter CG group is looking at runtime keys. So across all the new runtimes like Deno, Bun, obviously with Node, they're looking at trying to standardize some common keys. There's a package JSON standardization working group that's sort of being spun up in the OpenJS Foundation. We're looking at doing research right now. And I've been pushing for the standardization of Semver. So semantic versioning. It'd be great if we had a runtime or web API that could parse semantic version strings just like you have date string parsing. It's way more broadly applicable to than just packages. People use Semver all over the place. I'm sure you've seen it in blog posts or all over the place. Of course, the thing closest to my heart, and some of my friends will laugh at me for, it's not Darcy selector syntax, I swear. It's the dependency selector syntax. This is basically CSS on steroids. I got CSS in your JS, and you didn't even know it. The dependency selector syntax is a lifted variant of CSS that allows you to write expressive queries against your dependency graph. And guess what? It exists in the most popular package manager today. Right? I wrote this spec back when I was still working at NPM, and we built a really robust query language for you to expressively find and do introspection of your project's dependencies. Here are just some of the types of queries that you can write today with npm query. And go find things in your dependency. Go get interested in what's inside of that black box, your node modules. So there's things like has, right? Some of the even browsers don't have has, right? Isn't Moz still dragging their feet on Firefox support? So there's some really interesting things. There's attribute selection. So anything that's in your packages, package JSON gets loaded into the graph, and you're able to query those just like CSS attribute queries. So who likes CSS here? Bunch of JavaScript developers? Yeah, whatever. Cool. I'm from a day when jQuery was cool, okay? CSS, though, is an extremely expressive language. If you've tried to see what other security tools make you write, it's like XPath selectors. Do you want to use that? Come on. And there's some really interesting things you can do with these selectors. You can actually find packages that have an engine's definition for Node. You can find really, you can do some interesting things, like get peer dependencies, find any deduped or non-deduped versions of React that were optional. There's some crazy things. And here at the bottom, you can even see we can find all the packages potentially in our dependency tree that have install scripts, right? All through using an attribute selector. It's super powerful. And there's even some very cool specific pseudo selectors for things that we find in package management, like Semver, example, to do Semver matching, pattern matching, as well as outdated pseudo states for your packages to essentially tell you whether or not you have a stale version of a dependency in your dependency graph. And guess what? This is actually available to you programmatically as well. It's not just through the CLI, but you can actually include the NPM's internal arborist library. And what's that? It's a query selector all method that's hanging off of the dependency tree, right? Just like the DOM, right? So when I say DSS is like CSS, I'm not kidding, right? DOM is now the dependency object model. I'm taking it back. So if you want to try this out, you want to do some introspection, you want to get interested about what's inside of your projects, you can run npm query today. It works on Yarn and PNPM projects. You might have a mind blown moment there, but you can actually run it on pretty much anything. Here I've got an example of me actually piping a query to JQ, doing some interesting things to pull out the version and the name and list those. Of course, once we have these amazing tools, our standard tool like DSS, across all of our package managers, we can do interesting things like validation. Not in the spec today, and hopefully in new tools like Volt potentially, will be vulnerability data, right? To be able to query your dependencies based on the type of CWE, which is the common weakness enumeration number, or ID, or a specific variable, a specific ID for the actual CVE. And so you can imagine that running an NPM audit becomes an NPM query, right? And you can include or exclude specific issues with dependencies using the selector. And of course, if you use ESLint, you can imagine where you can take this dependency selector syntax into policies, right? Policies that live inside of your projects that basically enforce the installation or linting or airing and warning of dependencies. And so I truly imagine us having amazing tools, just like the browser, to write CSS or DSS and to be able to query your dependency graph just like you do today with the DOM. And so looking forward, I'm pretty sure I'm almost at time or I'm beyond time. True next gen, what does that look like? Well, yeah, it's that logo. It's pretty cool. True next gen is, I hope, Volt. I left NPM for a reason, and I'm working on a new package manager. It's open source. It will be also have an open registry backend. It's backwards compatible with legacy NPM clients. It has ecosystem-wide search and policy engine. So the dependency selector you saw today that lives in NPM is only project-specific. You can write policies, you can write queries against the entire registry with Volt. Packages as a service is a net new capability. I'm not speaking too much on it today, but you can imagine that we will be shipping and offering packages to be consumed as APIs. And it will have first-class support, as I said, for dependency selectors, distributions, workspaces, build pipelines, and a lot more. So some takeaways. New tools are here, more coming soon. Feature-rich tools are way better. Swiss Army knives are way better than just having like a grab bag of numerous tools, especially when you're talking about keeping your dependency graph depth low. And performance alone is a race to the bottom. Unfortunately, the tools that are only focused on performance alone are missing out on opportunity to offer real value in the features and capabilities in their tools. And of course, accurate information in your supply chains is mission critical. It's the baseline. And the companies that don't care about this should not, you should move with your feet, move with your traction. You need to get off those platforms and not give your trust to those platforms if they don't care about protecting you. So next gen package management tool looks like something that is fast, open source, standard, accurate, secure, and hopefully sustainable. So thank you. Thank you very much.